On the night of April 14, 1912, a fashion journalist named Edith Rosenbaum walked the Titanic's deck holding a strange little charm, a toy pig that played music. Between the laughter of high society and the soft hush of the sea, no one imagined that childish object would matter just a few hours later. When the ship began to sink, the toy was used to soothe children in a lifeboat, alone in the middle of the Atlantic. Before we step into this historical reconstruction, hit like, subscribe, and come see how one simple toy became part of Titanic history. On April 10, 1912, Edith Rosenbaum boarded the Titanic in Cherbourg, France, traveling as a first-class passenger. A fashion journalist, she was heading back to the United States after covering collections in Paris, with trunks packed full of clothes and fabric samples. Among her belongings was a small cloth pig that played music, given as a gift and kept close like a personal good luck charm. In those first hours on board, her attention was on the ship's elegance and the passengers' style, not on any hint of danger. Reports and documents from the time suggest that day, the crossing still felt like just another safe voyage across the Atlantic. In the first days of the crossing, life aboard the Titanic seemed to confirm the promise of total safety. Edith moved between the deck and the grand salons, quietly studying hats, coats, and dresses she would later describe in print. Like many first-class passengers, she enjoyed formal dinners, live music, and slow walks in the open air, with no visible sign of worry. The little music pig, kept in her cabin or tucked in her bag, remained simply a sentimental object, known to only a few nearby. Historical accounts indicate that the ice warnings received by radio did not change the routine for most travelers. On April 14, 1912, the Titanic continued in apparent normalcy as the air and water began to turn sharper and colder. Throughout the day, the wireless room received multiple ice warnings along the route. They were logged, but hardly felt by the passengers. Edith stayed in her rhythm between the deck and the lounges, watching clothing and manners for future articles. That afternoon, she passed officers gathered near the bridge, unaware they were discussing course and speed. For most people on board, it was still just another comfortable night aboard the largest ship in the world. On the night of April 14, 1912, the sudden drop in temperature became obvious to anyone who stepped onto the deck. The sea was almost glassy, a condition often linked to ice in the North Atlantic. Inside the ship, though, the mood was still formal dinners, music, and easy conversation, and Edith followed that pace without receiving any specific warning. In the wireless room, more ice bulletins arrived and were recorded among passengers' personal messages. Evidence suggests that while most people ended the day as if it were just another night at sea, the Titanic was already pushing into a zone of growing risk. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14, 1912, the Titanic struck the iceberg. Many passengers felt only a light shudder, later compared to a gentle break or a long scrape along the hull. In her account, Edith describes it as strange but not frightening, something that briefly interrupted the night's routine. While some guests opened their cabin doors to ask what happened, the crew still moved with a calm that looked almost rehearsed. In that first moment, almost no one on board understood the ship had taken serious damage below the waterline. In the minutes after impact, officers began assessing the damage below decks and realized water was already flooding multiple forward compartments. Internal reports suggested the ship could stay afloat for a while, but the normal voyage was over. In first class, stewards were instructed to wake passengers gently, asking them to put on life vests and head to the boat deck as a precaution. Edith received the message without fully grasping what it meant and returned to her cabin to bundle up. While sailors pulled off covers and prepared the lifeboats, most people still believed they would be back in their cabins within a few hours. As time passed, the crew's instructions became more direct. Everyone had to wear life vests and move up to the lifeboat deck. Many first-class passengers treated it like an overreaction, convinced it was only temporary. Edith flowed with the crowd, her vest over her coat, still not accepting that the night would not return to normal. Officers began forming lines and enforcing women and children first, still in controlled voices. At the same time, accounts indicate music continued in some areas, an effort to keep nerves steady as the first boats were readied. As the night deepened, the lifeboat deck grew crowded and the ship's tilt became easier to feel. Testimonies suggest that in this window, the difference between classes was already visible in who could access the upper decks. Edith, as a first-class passenger, managed to stay close to the boats, still believing the evacuation might be temporary. For many, the worst part was the brutal cold and the long wait, not the idea that the ship could be lost. While some boats were lowered with empty seats, other groups hesitated, certain they would return to their cabins in a few hours. This moment of apparent order came right before panic began to rise more clearly on board. Minute by minute, the gap between those who still doubted the danger and those who finally understood it became visible on deck. Lifeboats began leaving fuller, and the growing tilt made movement harder, forcing passengers to cling to railings and walls. Accounts describe arguments at the boat line, with men trying to follow wives and children, not always allowed by officers. Edith watched this tense organization, caught between disciplined lines and the fear of being left behind. Meanwhile, groups from the lower decks finally reached the upper level, adding to the feeling of confusion and urgency. At a certain point, children became more visible on the lifeboat deck. many temporarily separated from part of their family. Testimonies suggest that women like Edith stepped into a quiet support role, helping organize small groups and keep them together in line. Boarding no longer felt like a safety drill. It felt like a breaking point between those who would leave and those who would remain. This is where the story of the music pig begins to matter. As you watch this reconstruction, pay attention to the details of these decisive minutes. If this story lands with you, hit like and share it so more people can learn Edith's real account aboard the Titanic. Once on the water, the feeling inside the lifeboats changed instantly. For many passengers, including Edith, the physical distance from the Titanic was the first real sign there might be no return. Survivors describe cramped boats, people pressed close together, some without proper coats against the cutting cold. Children cried. Adults tried to stay steady, shifting positions to balance the boat. With every stroke away, the ship looked more tilted, louder, more alive in its struggle. It made the truth harder to avoid. This accident was becoming irreversible. As the Titanic sank deeper by the bow, the sound of metal under strain carried across the water like a constant groan. In Edith's lifeboat, the cold was so intense it was hard to even grip the oars, and the children cried more often. Some survivors recalled that no one truly knew whether another ship would answer the distress calls sent by radio. That's when Edith used the music pig, now placed in a child's hands, to pull attention away from fear. The simple, childlike tune clashed with the distant noise of the ship and gave the youngest survivors a rhythm to hold on to. Just before 2 a.m., the Titanic entered its most critical phase. From the lifeboat, Edith and the others watched the bow vanish almost completely as the stern lifted at a severe angle. Survivors describe a sudden rise in the grinding roar of the hull, followed by the gradual loss of lights. Screams from the ship and from the water began filling the Atlantic night, the moment the scale of the tragedy became undeniable. Inside the boat, Edith kept the children close and started the music pig again. Inside the boat, Edith kept the children close and started the music pig again, trying to give them a sound that wasn't collapse. The little melody, looping over and over, lived alongside the distant sound of people fighting to survive. After the Titanic disappeared, the dominant sound became scattered cries in the darkness. Accounts suggest many lifeboats hesitated between rowing back to help and staying away, afraid of being swamped by the crowd in the water. In Edith's boat, the priority became keeping the children together and holding panic down. The cold robbed people of movement, and some passengers could barely speak. While adults argued in low voices about what to do, Edith kept her eyes on the sea and the small group depending on her, using the toy as a focal point whenever the crying started again. After the sinking, time in the lifeboats was measured in cold and exhaustion. Without a clear sense of the clock, many survivors remembered only a night that seemed endless. In Edith's boat, some passengers tried to keep a steady rowing pace to move away from debris, while others had no strength left to help. The children drifted between crying and broken sleep, wrapped in borrowed coats and improvised blankets. The music pig was wound up in intervals, sometimes more to keep frozen hands busy than to make the tune truly audible. Around them, the Atlantic darkness pressed in, and no one knew if help would come before dawn. After hours of near-total darkness, survivors noticed a subtle change in the sky. In Edith's lifeboat, the horizon gained a faint outline, signaling that morning was approaching. Testimonies mention that, at one point, a distant light appeared in brief flashes, sparking debate. Was it a ship or an illusion born from fatigue? With no confirmation, the rowers tried to keep the boats relatively close, afraid of scattering across open water. Every hint of brightness was treated like a possible sign of rescue, keeping a thin thread of hope alive. As dawn advanced, the light on the horizon grew clearer until it became the silhouette of a steamship. The survivors understood then that the radio signals sent through the night had been received. The RMS Carpathia approached slowly, finding lifeboats scattered in different directions. In Edith's boat, seeing that ship was the first solid proof that rescue was real. Even then, it wasn't immediate. The lifeboats had to be guided in, and the larger ship had to maneuver safely. The shift from absolute darkness to daylight also marked a transition, from raw survival to the long work of recording what had happened. Aboard the Carpathia, survivors were guided into different areas of the ship, given blankets, hot drinks, and borrowed clothing. Records indicate women and children were prioritized in the first wave of care, while the crew organized name lists and tried to identify the missing. Edith, wrapped in a blanket over her cork life vest, became part of a silent crowd filling corridors and lounges turned into makeshift shelters. The music pig stayed with one of the children she had helped in the boat, now in a less hostile space, but still surrounded by shock. Slowly, the Carpathia became both a refuge and the first place where the disaster began to take shape in words. In the hours after rescue, the Carpathia also became a place of documentation. Officers and crew began recording names, cabin numbers, and information about missing relatives. Handwritten lists were compiled in different parts of the ship to organize who had been saved. Edith, still shaken, became part of the process indirectly, answering questions and confirming identities of other passengers. Meanwhile, children rescued without all family members present were gathered and watched over by volunteers. The music pig remained visible among them, a small object that helped mark the bond between Edith and the children who had shared her lifeboat. In the days that followed, as the Carpathia sailed toward New York, the ship became a place where silence and information lived side by side. With every radio message sent or received, the true scale of the tragedy expanded, both on board and back on land. Survivors were called at times to update lists, describe cabins, and name missing relatives. Edith, like other first-class passengers, was interviewed more than once, offering details about order on the Titanic and the moments before the sinking. In this period, the music pig was no longer used often, but it remained a quiet reference point between the child holding it and Edith herself. As the Carpathia neared New York, the voyage stopped being only a rescue and became a return to a world that already knew the tragedy. Radio messages had announced the ship's arrival, and crowds waited at the port. Journalists, families, officials. For survivors like Edith, the sight of the harbor meant safety, but also the beginning of a different kind of exposure. Public questions, official inquiries. The first hours on land included reception centers, list checks, and early statements to the press. The music pig, which had survived the sinking and the long night in the lifeboat, arrived too. A small physical trace of an unimaginable experience. In the weeks that followed, Edith and other survivors were called to testify in official investigations into the sinking. In London, New York, and beyond, commissions sought answers about command decisions, lifeboat use, and crew conduct. As a first-class passenger and a direct witness to the evacuation, Edith described the organization on deck, the presence of children in her boat, and the ship's mood before impact. At times, she mentioned the music pig as part of her testimony, linking the object to the effort to calm children during the night. Those statements helped build a clearer record of the disaster and influenced future maritime safety rules. As decades passed, the Titanic stopped being breaking news and became a historical reference point. Survivors like Edith continued sharing their memories in interviews, articles, and conversations with researchers. In later records, she again mentioned the music pig as inseparable from her lifeboat experience. The toy, kept for years, eventually entered collections tied to the disaster's memory, becoming an object studied by historians and displayed to the public. By combining oral testimony, documents, and physical artifacts, museums helped anchor Edith's story as one of many tangible threads connecting the present to that night in 1912. As the 20th century moved forward, Edith's story was cited more often in books, articles, and specialized Titanic research. Scholars highlighted her testimony as a concrete window into daily life on board and the impact on women traveling alone. The music pig appeared in museum catalogs and studies of material memory after disasters, showing how personal objects can help reconstruct extreme experiences. In documentaries and exhibits, the toy is often tied to the effort to protect children amid chaos. In that way, Edith's account became part of a larger narrative, one that blends technical facts, eyewitness testimony, and preserved traces. Today, Edith's story and the little music pig are remembered alongside hundreds of other Titanic narratives. In books, documentaries, and exhibitions, her account brings the audience closer to the human details of life at the edge of disaster. Instead of treating the sinking as pure statistics or a technical curiosity, the toy invites us to see the night through the eyes of children and the people who tried to shield them. When we revisit these moments now, we piece together images of the ship, engineering evidence, and small personal objects to build a fuller understanding of what happened in 1912, connecting past and present. When you look today at that small music pig behind museum glass, it's easy to forget it once sat in a lifeboat in a night like 1912. Records indicate Edith kept the object for the rest of her life, tying it to the moment she chose to calm children while the Titanic vanished into the Atlantic. Through testimony, period documents, and the toy's own survival, part of that experience can be reconstructed with sharper clarity. When we follow Edith's path, the story stops being only about the ship that sank. It becomes about the human decision to hold on to a child's toy while everything else seemed to fall apart.